What happens when Hollywood royalty meets daytime television royalty and absolutely everything goes wrong? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with the View hosts for what was supposed to be a friendly chat about her latest ventures, only to have it spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime TV history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Joy Behar finally reaches her breaking point with the Duchess of Sussex. The studio lights were blazing hot as the View's iconic theme music faded, and the familiar faces of Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin settled into their chairs around the famous table. The energy in the studio felt different today, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that even the production crew could sense. Meghan Markle, draped in an expensive cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, sat poised in the guest chair with that practiced smile she'd perfected during her royal days. "Welcome back to The View," Joy began, her voice carrying that signature New York edge that had made her a daytime television legend. "We're here with Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, actress, podcaster, and entrepreneur. Meghan, thanks for joining us today." Meghan's smile widened, but there was something calculated behind it, something that immediately put the seasoned hosts on alert. "Thank you for having me, Joy. I'm thrilled to be here with such powerful women." The compliment landed with a thud that only experienced television veterans could detect. Whoopi raised an eyebrow slightly, while Sunny shifted in her chair. They'd all been in this business long enough to recognize when someone was trying too hard to charm their way through an interview. "So let's dive right in," Alyssa said, leaning forward with her journalist instincts kicking in. "You and Harry have been very vocal about your experiences with the British press and the royal family. But some critics have pointed out that you've also courted that same media attention with your Netflix deals, your podcast, your book. How do you reconcile those two positions?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, but it was enough for the eagle-eyed hosts to notice. "Well, Alyssa, I think there's a fundamental difference between choosing to tell your own story and having your story told for you, often incorrectly. But isn't that what everyone in the public eye deals with?" Sarah interjected, her tone remaining friendly but pointed. "I mean, we all face criticism and scrutiny. What makes your situation so uniquely difficult?" Meghan's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. The mask was starting to slip, and Joy, who had been watching this unfold with the keen eye of someone who'd been doing this for decades, decided to probe a little deeper. "Let me ask you this, Meghan," Joy said, her voice taking on that particular tone that regular View watchers knew meant business. "You left the royal family citing privacy concerns and media intrusion. But then you did that Oprah interview, the Netflix series, Harry's book, your podcast. To a lot of people, it looks like you wanted privacy on your terms while still cashing in on the royal connection. How do you respond to that?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath as Meghan's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her smile became forced, plastic, and there was a flash of something dangerous in her eyes. "Joy, I think that's a very reductive way of looking at our situation," Meghan replied, her voice carrying a new edge that hadn't been there moments before. "We were literally driven out of the country by racist attacks from the British tabloids. The fact that we've chosen to reclaim our narrative doesn't make us hypocrites." "But nobody drove you out," Whoopi interjected, her legendary directness cutting through the diplomatic language. "You made a choice to leave. And that's fine, but let's call it what it is." Meghan's head snapped toward Whoopi with a look that could have melted steel. "Whoopi, with all due respect, you weren't there. You don't know what we went through behind closed doors." "You're right. I wasn't there," Whoopi replied evenly. "But I've been in this business for a long time, and I know the difference between legitimate criticism and persecution. And I also know when someone's playing the victim card." The tension in the studio ratcheted up another notch. Sunny, ever the lawyer, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "I think what we're all trying to understand, Meghan, is the consistency of the message. On one hand, you talk about wanting privacy and being away from the spotlight, but your actions suggest otherwise." Meghan turned to face Sunny with a look that was pure ice. "Sunny, I'm surprised at you. As a woman of color, I would have expected you to understand the unique challenges I faced as the only person of mixed race in that family." The comment landed like a bombshell. Sunny's eyes widened, not in surprise, but in offense. The implication was clear and insulting, that Sunny should automatically side with Meghan based solely on race, regardless of the merits of the argument. "Excuse me," Sunny said, her voice rising slightly. "I think I can make my own judgments about your situation, without you telling me how I should think based on my race." Meghan realized her mistake immediately, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm just saying that there are certain experiences that some people can relate to more than others. And I'm saying that being biracial doesn't give you a free pass to avoid accountability." Sunny shot back, her legal training evident in her precise, cutting words. Joy had been watching this exchange with growing fascination and annoyance. She'd seen plenty of difficult guests over the years, but there was something particularly grating about Meghan's approach. The way she seemed to think she could manipulate the conversation by playing different cards when convenient. "You know what, Meghan?" Joy said, her Brooklyn accent becoming more pronounced as her patience wore thin. "I've been doing this show for over 20 years, and I've interviewed everyone from presidents to pop stars. And one thing I can tell you is that the most compelling guests are the ones who can take responsibility for their own choices instead of constantly pointing fingers at everyone else." Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. "Joy, I don't appreciate being lectured by someone who's never walked in my shoes. And I don't appreciate being dismissed by someone who thinks their problems are more important than everyone else's." Joy fired back, her voice rising. "You want to know what I think? I think you had an amazing opportunity. You threw it away. Because it wasn't perfect, and now you're spending all your time trying to justify that decision instead of moving forward." The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Alyssa tried to jump in with a diplomatic comment, but Meghan cut her off. "That's incredibly unfair and uninformed," Meghan said, her composure finally starting to crack completely. "You have no idea what kind of racism and harassment we faced." "Oh, here we go again," Joy muttered, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up that Meghan's head whipped around to face Joy directly. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" Joy looked her dead in the eye, and viewers could see that she'd had enough. "I said here we go again with the same talking points, the same victim narrative, the same refusal to take any responsibility for your own choices." The studio had become a powder keg, and everyone knew they were moments away from an explosion that would make daytime television history. But what happened next would shock even the most seasoned talk show veterans. Meghan leaned back in her chair with a laugh that was anything but amused. It was cold, calculated, and dripping with condescension. "You know what, Joy? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone like me tries to speak their truth, women like you shut us down." The words hung in the air like a slap across the face. Joy's mouth fell open slightly, not in shock, but in the kind of disbelief that comes when someone has just crossed a line they can never uncross. The other hosts exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They all knew Meghan had just made a catastrophic mistake. "Women like me," Joy repeated slowly, her voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly do you mean by that, Meghan?" Meghan seemed to realize she'd stepped into quicksand, but instead of trying to climb out, she kept digging. "I mean women who've been in positions of privilege for so long that they can't understand what it's like for those of us who've actually faced real discrimination." Whoopi's legendary composure finally cracked. She turned in her chair to face Meghan directly, and her voice carried the weight of decades of experience in entertainment, activism, and life itself. "Real discrimination? Honey, let me tell you about real discrimination. I was performing in blackface comedy clubs when you were in diapers. I fought for every single opportunity one got in this business when the doors weren't just closed to people who looked like me. They were welded shut. And that's admirable, Whoopi, but..." Meghan began, but Whoopi wasn't finished. "Don't you dare, but me," Whoopi interrupted, her voice rising. "You married into the most privileged family on earth, lived in palaces, had staff waiting on you, hand and foot, and you're sitting here telling us about discrimination? Girl, please." Meghan's face flushed red, and her carefully maintained composure was disintegrating by the second. "You don't understand the psychological torture." "Psychological torture," Sarah interjected, her usually sweet demeanor replaced by something much sharper. Meghan, people are dealing with real torture in the world. People are fighting for their lives, losing their homes, struggling to feed their families. You had a fairy tale wedding watched by billions, and you're calling royal protocol psychological torture. The intervention from Sarah, typically the most diplomatic of the hosts, seemed to push Meghan over the edge. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone in the studio wince. "This is unbelievable," Meghan said, her voice shaking with rage. "I came here expecting to have an adult conversation with fellow women, and instead I'm being attacked by a bunch of what?" Joy demanded, also rising from her chair. "Finish that sentence. Meghan, what were you about to call us?" Meghan caught herself, but the damage was already done. Everyone could see she'd been about to say something she couldn't take back, and her hesitation only made it worse. "I wasn't going to call you anything," Meghan said weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. "You absolutely were," Sunny said, her prosecutor instincts in full display. "And the fact that you stopped yourself tells us exactly what kind of person you really are." Alyssa, who had been trying to maintain some semblance of professional decorum, finally lost her patience. "You know what, Meghan? I've tried to give you the benefit of the doubt throughout this interview, but your attitude is absolutely appalling. You came on our show, you're being hostile to our audience, you're dismissive of our questions, and now you're insulting the hosts. What exactly did you think was going to happen?" Meghan whirled around to face Alyssa, her eyes blazing. "I thought I was going to be treated with basic respect, which clearly was too much to ask from this show." "Respect is earned," Joy said, stepping closer to Meghan. "And frankly, you haven't earned it. You've spent the entire interview playing victim, making excuses, and now you're insulting us because we had the audacity to ask you real questions instead of kissing your ring." "I don't have to stand here and listen to this," Meghan said, her voice reaching a pitch that was starting to sound unhinged. "You're absolutely right," Whoopi said, standing up as well. "You don't have to stand here. In fact, maybe you shouldn't." The suggestion hit Meghan like a physical blow. She looked around the table at the 5 women who had now all turned against her, and for the first time, she seemed to realize that she had severely miscalculated the situation. "Are you seriously suggesting that I leave?" Meghan asked, her voice incredulous. "I'm not suggesting anything," Whoopi replied evenly. "I'm stating a fact. If you can't handle being asked legitimate questions about your very public choices, then maybe daytime television isn't for you." Meghan's face contorted with rage. This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove us out of England. The same close-minded, judgmental attitude that, "Oh, give me a break." Joy exploded, finally losing the last of her patience. "Everything is someone else's fault with you, isn't it? The royal family, the British press, the American media, and now us. When are you going to look in the mirror and ask yourself if maybe, just maybe, you're the common denominator in all these conflicts?" The question hit its target like a guided missile. Meghan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, and everyone in the studio could see that Joy had just delivered a knockout blow. But instead of backing down or admitting fault, Meghan did what she always did when cornered. She went nuclear. "You know what your problem is, Joy?" Meghan said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're a bitter old woman who's jealous that someone half your age accomplished more in 5 years than you have in your entire career." The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. It was the kind of silence that comes before something truly catastrophic happens, the calm before the storm that everyone knows is about to destroy everything in its path. Joy's face went white, then red, then something beyond red that didn't have a name. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with pure, unadulterated fury. "Get her off my stage," Joy said quietly, but her voice carried to every corner of the studio. "Get her off my stage right now." But Meghan wasn't done. In a moment of spectacular misjudgment that would define her public image forever, she decided to keep talking. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" Meghan continued, her voice rising to a near shriek. "All of you sitting here, tearing down another woman, when you should be supporting me. But I guess that's what happens when people get comfortable in their little bubble of mediocrity." The insult landed like a nuclear bomb. Sarah's jaw dropped completely open. Alyssa looked like she'd been physically slapped, and Sunny actually gasped out loud. But it was Whoopi's reaction that truly captured the magnitude of what had just happened. The legendary entertainer, who had seen and survived everything the industry could throw at her, slowly shook her head with a look of pure disgust. Mediocrity. Whoopi said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more powerful than if she'd been screaming. You just called 5 Emmy award-winning, groundbreaking women mediocre? You, who couldn't even last 2 years in a job that was handed to you on a silver platter. Meghan seemed to finally realize she'd gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Joy interrupted, her voice cold as ice. You meant every word, and you know what? You just showed everyone watching exactly who you really are. The production team was frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive daytime television meltdown in history. The show's producers were in the control room, debating whether to cut to commercial, but they knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. I built my career from nothing, Joy continued, stepping closer to Meghan. I performed in dive bars in Queens when you were playing dress-up in your privileged little world. I fought tooth and nail for every opportunity, every laugh, every moment of respect I earned in this business. And you have the unmitigated gall to come on my show and call me mediocre. Meghan's composure was completely gone now. Her carefully styled hair was slightly disheveled from her animated gesturing. Her makeup was starting to show the strain of the heated exchange, and her voice was becoming more shrill by the second. I don't have to justify my success to any of you, Meghan said desperately. I've overcome obstacles you can't even imagine. What obstacles? Sunny demanded, her legal background evident in her precise, cutting delivery. Having to follow royal protocol? Having to smile and wave at people who adored you? Having to live in luxury while representing one of the most respected institutions in the world? Those are your obstacles. You don't understand the pressure, Meghan began, but Alyssa cut her off. We all understand pressure, Alyssa said firmly. The difference is, most of us don't run away when things get challenging and then spend years complaining about it publicly. Meghan turned to Sarah, perhaps hoping to find some sympathy from the typically gentler host. But Sarah's expression was stone cold. You know what I find most disappointing about this whole thing? Sarah said quietly. You had a platform that millions of women would kill for. You could have used your position to make real change, to help real people. Instead, you threw it all away and have spent years making it all about you. The words hit Meghan like physical blows. She looked around the table at the 5 women who had completely dismantled her carefully constructed public persona in a matter of minutes. For a moment, it looked like she might actually break down and cry. But instead, she did something that surprised everyone. She laughed. Not the controlled, media-trained laugh she'd been using throughout the interview, but a wild, almost hysterical sound that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. This is rich, Meghan said, wiping her eyes dramatically. 5 women who made their careers talking about other people are lecturing me about making things about myself. The irony is just, it's beautiful. Joy had reached her absolute breaking point. She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Meghan, close enough that the cameras could capture every detail of her expression. Let me make something crystal clear to you, Joy said, her voice deadly quiet. We made our careers by being talented, by working hard, by earning our places at this table. You made yours by marrying well and then complaining about it. Those are not the same thing. Meghan's face went white, then red, then a mottled combination of both. How dare you? How dare I what? Joy interrupted. How dare I tell you the truth? How dare I refuse to bow down to your victim narrative? How dare I treat you like everyone else instead of handling you with kid gloves? The studio was electric with tension. Everyone could feel that they were witnessing something historic, a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. But it was Whoopi who delivered the final blow. You want to know what the real tragedy is here? Whoopi said, standing up and facing Meghan directly. You had everything. You had a fairy tale wedding. You had the love and respect of millions of people. You had a chance to make a real difference in the world. And you threw it all away because it wasn't perfect. And now you're sitting here, insulting women who've actually earned their success, because you can't handle being held accountable for your choices. Meghan's mask finally fell away completely. Gone was the polished, media-trained Duchess. In her place stood someone who looked genuinely unhinged, desperate, and completely out of her depth. "I'm done with this," Meghan said, grabbing her purse with shaking hands. "I'm done with all of you." "Good," Joy said simply. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." Meghan stood there for a moment, perhaps expecting someone to try to stop her or apologize. But the five hosts simply watched her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The silence stretched on uncomfortably until Meghan finally realized that nobody was going to chase after her. "This will be the last time I appear on daytime television," Meghan announced dramatically, as if she were doing them all a favor. "Promise?" Sunny asked dryly, which drew a snort of laughter from Sarah despite the tension. Meghan's face contorted with rage one final time. She opened her mouth as if to deliver one last insult, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the studio floor. But she couldn't resist one final dramatic gesture. At the edge of the stage, she turned back to face the hosts and the cameras. "You'll all regret this," she said, pointing a manicured finger at the table. "I have more influence than any of you realize." Joy stood up slowly, and her response was delivered with the perfect timing that had made her a comedy legend. "Sweetheart," Joy said with a sweet smile, "if you had that much influence, you'd still be a working royal." The final insult hit its mark perfectly. Meghan's face crumpled, and without another word, she stormed off the stage and disappeared into the wings. The sound of a door slamming echoed throughout the studio, followed by blessed silence. The five hosts looked at each other for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Joy turned to the camera with a grin that was pure Brooklyn attitude. "Well," Joy said, straightening her jacket, "I guess we know why she really left the royal family." The audience, which had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally erupted in applause. Whoopi shook her head with a mixture of amusement and disbelief, while the other hosts began to laugh despite themselves. "We'll be right back after this commercial break," Whoopi announced to the cameras, assuming we still have jobs after that. As the cameras cut away and the show went to commercial, the five women sat back in their chairs, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. They had just witnessed and participated in what would undoubtedly go down as one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. The confrontation was over, Meghan Markle was gone, and The View would never be quite the same again.